Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we'll be looking at some fascinating statistics about everyday life.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
We're taking this straight from a podcast episode called The Wild Truth About Life from the Statistically Speaking podcast.
Oh, I love that podcast.
It's a good one. And get ready for some aha moments as we unpack these surprising numbers and see what they reveal about human nature,
Yeah, definitely. Including us.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start with something I bet you experienced. Have you ever, walked into a room
Oh, yeah.
and totally blanked on why you went there?
All the time.
Like, what was I doing?
Yeah, it's so frustrating.
It turns out that's not just me.
Oh, good.
The podcast mentions that 60% of people experience this at least once a day.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, scientists even have a name for it. It's called the event boundary phenomenon.
Okay, event boundary.
Yeah, so it's like our brains are hitting the reset button every time we cross a threshold.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, literally compartmentalizing our activities.
Like, almost like to protect us from too much input.
Right. Or maybe too much output. I don't even know. But seriously, why does this happen?
Well, think about it. Our brains are constantly bombarded with information.
Oh, yeah.
Every room, every location we enter represents a shift in context.
Right.
And our brains are kind of trying to create these mental boundaries to manage it all.
Right.
Unfortunately, that sometimes means details from the previous compartment get lost in the shuffle.
Oh, so it's like my brain is a bad streaming service.
Yeah.
It's buffering between scenes and dropping important plot points along the way.
Exactly. That's a great analogy.
I like that. And what's even more interesting is the podcast also connected this to our digital world, like how picking up our phones can completely derail our train of thought.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like those notifications are mini event boundaries,
Yeah.
constantly interrupting our flow and pulling our attention in different directions.
Ugh, it's so true.
It's a good reminder to be mindful of those distractions.
Yeah.
And maybe create spaces where we can really focus.
Seriously, mindfulness is key. Okay, but speaking of things that can totally take over our brains, let's talk about music.
Okay.
Did you know that those spine-tingling moments you get when you hear a really powerful song are actually linked to the same chemical reaction in our brains as chocolate?
Oh, really?
Isn't that
I
crazy?
did not know that.
Yeah. So about 50% of people experience those chills from music, and it's all thanks to dopamine.
Dopamine.
Yes, this neurotransmitter that's associated with pleasure and reward.
Interesting.
So basically, when we hear music that really resonates with us, our brains release dopamine, making us feel good and crave more of that feeling.
Wow, so music is literally like a drug.
Kind of. Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I always knew music was powerful, but I never realized it was literally tapping into my brain's reward system. Like it's giving me a high five.
That's amazing.
I know. And this has all sorts of interesting implications. Think about how music can supercharge your workouts.
Oh, yeah.
The podcast mentioned that people who listen to music while exercising tend to work out 15% longer.
Wow. I can definitely see that.
Me too. I'm totally one of those people. There's just something about a good beat that just keeps me going. But why does it work?
Well, there are a few theories out there.
Okay.
Some researchers think that it's about the rhythm and tempo of music syncing up with our movements, making exercise feel more fluid.
Okay.
Others suggest that music kind of acts as a distraction from fatigue.
Right.
So we're not as focused on how tired we are. And then, of course, music can just generally boost our mood,
Right.
making the whole experience more enjoyable.
It's like a workout hack. It's awesome. But, oh my gosh, have you ever had that moment at the gym where you realize you forgot your headphones?
Oh, yeah. It's the worst.
It's almost a deal breaker.
Yeah, if you just turn around and go home.
Right. I'm not even going to bother. Apparently, I'm not alone because the podcast stated that a whopping 30% of gym goers have actually left the gym simply because they forgot their headphones.
Wow.
I know silence can be a powerful deterrent, it seems.
It really can. Okay, let's shift gears from the physical to the digital world. We've all been there agonizing over a text message,
Oh my, yeah.
rewriting it a million times before finally hitting send.
Yes.
The curse of the overthinking texter.
That's me.
And you're not alone. The podcast shared that 45% of people rewrite their text messages at least 3 times before sending them.
3 times. Seriously.
Yeah.
I feel like I could write a whole novel, delete it, and then just send, okay.
Right. I know what you mean. It's funny because the statistic gives us a general idea,
Yeah.
but clearly individual texting habits vary wildly.
Oh, for sure.
But there's definitely something about digital communication
Yeah.
that makes us overthink things.
It makes you wonder why. Maybe it's because text messages lack those nonverbal cues we get in face-to-face conversations.
That's a good point.
Like you can't really read the tone or,
Yeah, you can't see their facial expressions.
Yeah, it's easy to misinterpret things or just feel like every word needs to be perfectly crafted.
Exactly. And then there's that whole anxiety of waiting for a reply. The podcast mentioned that 60% of people experience anxiety while waiting for a text message response.
Really?
Yeah, it's like we're constantly seeking validation
Yeah.
through these little digital interactions.
Oh, it's so true. Okay, let's end on a lighter note. Let's talk about travel.
Okay, all right.
Are you a window seat or an aisle seat person?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm a window seat person for sure.
Yes. Window seat for life.
What about you?
Me too. The podcast found that a solid 60% of travelers prefer window seats.
That makes sense.
I know, right? There's just something so magical about gazing out at the clouds and feeling like you have your own little world up there.
You get that sense of freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's also something to be said for the convenience of an aisle seat, especially if you need to get up frequently or have long legs or whatever.
That's true. But I feel like the trapped bladder scenario is a risk I'm willing to take for that sweet, sweet window view.
I agree. And then there's that mysterious 10% who say they don't have a preference at all.
Right. What is their secret?
Like what? Maybe they've mastered the art of teleportation or something?
Maybe they've just transcended the need for comfort.
That could be it. Maybe that's a deep dive for another day.
Yeah, we'll have to investigate that further.
But for now, we'll leave you with that thought. Join us for part 2, where we'll uncover even more fascinating stats about everyday life.
Welcome back. It's amazing how these, seemingly simple statistics
I know, right?
can spark so many questions about the way our brains work
Totally.
and how we, navigate the world.
For sure. And speaking of hidden patterns, let's revisit that whole walking into a room and forgetting why phenomenon.
Oh, yeah, the event boundary effect.
That's right.
Remember the podcast mentioned that a whopping 60% of us experience this daily.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it seems like our brains just love to compartmentalize information.
So it's not just me feeling like my brain is a giant messy filing cabinet.
They're not alone.
But if our brains are so easily distracted by physical doorways, what hope do we have against the constant barrage of digital distraction?
That's a great point.
Our phones are basically mini event boundaries going off every few seconds.
It's true. It's almost like our brains haven't fully adapted to this constant influx of information.
Right.
For most of human history, our environments were relatively stable.
Yeah.
We didn't have to deal with notifications popping up every other minute.
Seriously. It makes you wonder if all this digital stimulation is actually rewiring our brains in some way. Like maybe we're becoming less able to focus for extended periods or remember things as easily.
There's definitely a lot of research being done on the impact of technology on our cognitive abilities. It's fascinating, but also a little bit scary.
Yeah, I agree.
It makes you realize the importance of creating those tech-free zones.
Right.
And practicing mindfulness.
Totally.
To counteract the effects of all those digital distractions.
Absolutely. We need to give our brains a break sometime.
Oh.
Okay, let's switch gears to something a bit more uplifting.
Okay.
Music. I'm still blown away by the fact that those chills we get from listening to certain songs are linked to dopamine.
Oh, yeah.
The same neurotransmitter involved in pleasure and reward.
It's a really amazing connection.
It really is.
Yeah.
It highlights the power of music to tap into our deepest emotions and create these intense, visceral experiences.
For sure.
It's like music has this direct line to our emotional centers, bypassing all the logical overthinking parts of our brains.
That's a good way to put it.
No wonder it can be so therapeutic.
Totally. And don't forget about its impact on our physical performance.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about how people who listen to music while working out tend to exercise 15% longer.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that boost.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating is that music seems to work on multiple levels.
In what ways?
Well, it can motivate us. It can distract us from fatigue.
Yeah.
And it can just generally make the whole experience more enjoyable.
Think about all the different ways we use music in our lives.
Uh-huh.
We use it to pump us up, to calm us down, to help us focus, to celebrate, to grieve.
Yeah.
It's incredibly versatile.
It's like a sonic Swiss Army knife for our emotions and actions.
I love that analogy.
And speaking of action, have you ever had that moment at the gym where you realize you've forgotten your headphones?
Oh, the dreaded silent workout.
I know.
I think we've all been there at some point.
Right. It's almost unbearable. And I guess I'm not alone because the podcast mentioned that 30% of gym goers have actually left the gym because they forgot their headphones.
It's a real phenomena.
It really highlights how much we rely on auditory stimulation,
Yeah.
especially during activities that can be repetitive or physically demanding. Music provides this extra layer of engagement
Right.
that can make a huge difference in our motivation and enjoyment.
It's like our brains crave that extra input.
Totally. Okay, let's move from the physical world of the gym to the digital realm of communication.
I think that statistic about rewriting text messages really resonated with a lot of listeners.
It's definitely relatable.
Remember, 45% of people admitted to rewriting their messages at least 3 times before sending them.
And that's just the average. I know some people, myself included, who can spend an absurd amount of time crafting the perfect text. Why do we do that to ourselves?
Part of it might be the lack of nonverbal cues in text communication.
Yeah,
We can't rely on tone of voice or facial expressions to convey our meaning,
right.
so we end up overcompensating with words.
It's like we're trying to pack all that emotional nuance into a few little lines of text.
Exactly. And then there's the pressure of knowing that whatever we send is going to be permanently recorded.
Ugh, I hate that.
So we're hyper aware of our digital footprint, and we want to make sure everything we put out there is on brand.
Ugh, too true. Plus, there's that agonizing wait for a reply. Remember the podcast said 60% of people experience anxiety while waiting for a text message response.
Oh, yeah. It's like every unanswered text is a referendum on our social standing and likability.
Oh my God, yes. And it makes you realize how much power we've given to these little digital interactions. Maybe it's time we all took a step back
I think so.
and reevaluated our relationship with texting.
A little digital detox now and then might do us all some good.
Agreed. Now let's shift gears to a lighter topic.
Okay.
Remember that age-old debate about window seats versus aisle seats?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
I'm a diehard window seat fan.
Well, you're in the majority. The podcast found that 60% of travelers prefer window seats.
Yes, window seat supremacy. What about you?
I actually enjoy both, depending on the situation. Sometimes I want that amazing view, and other times I value the convenience of an aisle seat.
I get that. Although I have to admit that trapped bladder scenario is a risk I'm always willing to take for that sweet window view.
Eh.
But what about that 10% who said they have no preference?
Right. Those people are a mystery. Maybe they've achieved some higher level of travel zen,
Maybe.
where they're completely unfazed by their seating assignment.
Or maybe they figured out how to teleport to the bathroom whenever they need to.
Haha, perhaps. But seriously, it's fascinating to see how even something as seemingly simple as our seating preferences can reveal these underlying patterns of human behavior.
And that's what makes these deep dives so interesting.
Totally.
It's all about uncovering those hidden connections
Right.
and realizing that we're all a lot more alike than we might think.
Exactly. And we'll continue exploring these fascinating statistical trends in part 3, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Oh.
So as we wrap up our exploration of these intriguing statistics,
Yeah.
it's really striking how they highlight both our individuality and our shared human experience,
It's like we're all part of this giant messy tapestry with all these unique threads, but somehow those threads keep weaving similar patterns.
Exactly. And what's cool is now that we're more aware of these patterns,
Right.
we can start to see them play out in our own lives and the lives of those around us. It's like we've unlocked this secret code to understanding human behavior.
It can be really eye-opening.
It is. And yet that awareness can be empowering.
Oh, for sure.
It helps us make sense of our own, quirks.
Yeah.
Recognize those moments where we're falling into predictable patterns.
Yeah.
And maybe even challenge those patterns if we want to.
Right. It's not about becoming a statistic.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the forces at play and using that knowledge to make more informed choices.
Exactly. So it's not about becoming a statistic. It's about understanding the forces at play and using that knowledge to make more informed choices.
Yeah.
Speaking of interactions, remember that statistic about the anxiety of waiting for text replies?
Oh, yeah. 60% of people feeling anxious while waiting for a response.
It makes you wonder if all this digital communication is actually making us more, not less anxious.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a double-edged sword.
Uh-huh.
On the one hand, it allows us to stay connected with people all over the world, but on the other hand, it creates these constant expectations
Yeah.
for instant responses and this fear of missing out.
It's like our brains are wired to crave that connection.
Totally.
But maybe we need to be more mindful about how we're getting it.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Maybe it's about setting healthier boundaries, being more intentional about our digital interactions,
Yeah.
and remembering that real connection often happens offline.
Such a good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the statistics can be incredibly insightful,
Yeah.
but they don't define us.
Right.
We're not just a collection of data points.
Mm-hmm.
We're complex beings with unique stories, experiences, and choices.
It's like, yes, 60% of people might prefer window seats,
Right.
but that doesn't mean you can't be the 40% who loves the aisle.
Exactly. Embrace your quirks, celebrate your individuality,
Yes.
and remember that you always have the power to choose your own path, even if it goes against the statistical grain.
I love that. It's been an amazing deep dive.
It has been.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the beautiful complexity of being human.